This video is going to be a little different. Instead of telling a story about a particular historical event, I'd like to talk about using the National Archives and Record Administration to obtain copies of my grandfather's military service record and weaving together his story. Basically, bringing him back to life, so to speak. Now, for those viewers who have dealt with the National Archives and Record Administration, NARA for short, you will undoubtedly have stories about navigating the NARA website. And that is all I will say about that. Now, unless you're really lucky and your grandfather left all of his important papers from when he served in a special file labeled My Service Record, you will have to deal with NARA. Now, the first step, you go to the eVetRec webpage. You launch the eVet Records request. Now, the eVet request system is self-explanatory. Just fill out the e-forms and hit the submit button, and your records will be on the way shortly. Yep, and the check is in the mail. Yeah, sometimes this system works, and then sometimes it doesn't. But don't worry, there is a backup. It's called the U.S. Postal Service. Yep, just click on this link right here, then fill out the standard Form 180, request pertaining to military service records, mail it to the correct address, and within 6 weeks or so, the records will be emailed to you, which is what I had to do for my grandfather's records. Now, in the case of my grandfather, the only thing I had to go on was his war certificate. The Navy did not start issuing service numbers until 1920, but this war certificate number enabled NARA to locate his complete service record. Now, in most cases, you will only need your relative's serial number or service number. This can be found on their DD-214. That's their discharge record. Now, veterans from World War II were also given a satisfactory service card as well as the DD-214. Now, they could carry this card in their wallet. Now, their service number is located on the card as well. This is an example of my father's satisfactory service card from the U.S. Coast Guard for his service during World War II. His serial number is located right next to his name. Now, if you don't have any records, then you should contact the Veterans Administration if you believed your relative had served. This way you can obtain a copy of their DD-214. Now, once you receive that document, you'll have enough information to order their complete file from NARA. Okay, now, if your relative happened to be into some very highly sensitive or secret stuff, then you will receive something like this. Yep, you're going to be out of luck until the government declassifies what your relative did. There's really not much else you can do about that. Okay, anyways, back to the story. Now that you have the records, now what? It does tell a story, so to speak. The service record will contain the basic information of date of enlistment, date of discharge, next of kin, where they were stationed, the descriptive list, which is basically their physical description of the enlistee, pay records, records of promotion and demotion, any service schools they attended, any awards given, insurance form for next of kin, etc., etc. Now, it's from this basic information that you can weave together a story, but you need to pay attention to things. You want to look at any letters and their dates. Allotment forms list wife or mother and their addresses. War risk insurance forms list primary and secondary beneficiaries and their addresses. This is how I found out that my grandfather's mother lived in the house next door. Now, in the case of my grandfather, he enlisted on June 27, 1918 at the enrolling office at the main gate of the Boston Navy Yard. The descriptive list states at the time of his enlistment he was 30 years old and 6 months. His height was 5 feet 8 inches. His weight was 173 pounds. He had brown eyes and brown hair. His complexion was ruddy. Basically, for a 30-year-old, he was in pretty good shape. Now, from this basic information, I know a couple of facts. Jack enlisted and had his physical on the same day, June 27, 1918. But there was a letter in his file that was interesting. The previous day, June 26, 1918, Jack went to the Navy Yard office of the Public Works officer and offered to enlist. Now, the letter was addressed to the district enrolling officer, stating subject enrollment of Mr. John M. Stavely. The letter stated, "It is understood by the Public Works officer that Mr. John M. Stavely desires to enroll in the Naval Reserve Force. Mr. Stavely is a graduate of Tufts College, 1909, and has had 9 years practical experience on construction work, which it is believed admirably fits him for work in this department. In the event of his enrollment, it is requested that, if practicable, Mr. Stavely be assigned to the Public Works Department. It is recommended that the rating of Chief Machinist Mate be given Mr. Stavely, if practicable." So, he offered his service as a civil engineer to the Navy. He was a 1909 graduate from Tufts College with a degree in civil engineering. He enlisted with the rank of Chief Petty Officer, Machinist Mate, with no previous naval experience. So what was going on at the Boston Navy Yard at that time? Okay, the U.S. declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917. That was 14 months earlier. The Navy was building ships and yards rapidly. There was a need for trained professionals, not only in the Navy, but in all the services. But why did he join the Naval Reserve Force? I found the answer to that question in a recruiting poster. Now, this poster was asking for cooks to join the Navy, but if you look closely, the poster states, "Enlist in the Naval Reserve Force for the war only." So basically, he didn't want to, make a career out of the Navy. The Naval Reserve was established in 1915, but it was only for previously enlisted Navy veterans. However, in 1916, the Navy realized they would need more men than the original reserve could supply, so they established the Naval Reserve Force. This opened up enlistment requirements into 6 categories based on experience, trade, and area of operability. But why did he wait until 1918 to enlist? Now, Jack was registered for the draft, but he was placed in what was called at that time Class 3. These were registrants employed in agricultural, labor, or industrial enterprises essential to the war effort. Now, Jack's draft card stated he was exempt because he was working on government contracts. Now, I'm just surmising here, but it looks like Jack's company had fulfilled the government contract by June of 1918. His enlistment record indicates Jack needed to get his draft board to write to the War Department stating, "This man is not needed for any defined quota of the local board." Now, this letter was written on June 26. Also, there was a handwritten note at the bottom which said, "To the Navy, that's for the city quota, good for 5 days." Now, this is just supposition, but I think with Jack's classification being changed from essential war work to Class 1, he decided to volunteer for the Navy. Otherwise, the draft board could have made him part of the next quota or draft levy. Hence the handwritten note, good for 5 days. Now again, this is just supposition on my part. So if I were to do a timeline for Jack, I would say that on June 26, 1918, he woke up, went down to his local draft board at number 18 Courthouse, Acadia Street, Dorchester, Mass., had the secretary of the draft board handwrite the letter. He then hopped on the T, that's the local trains, and headed across town to the Navy Yard in Chelsea. Now, he talked with the Navy Yard Office of Public Works officer, who then wrote the letter to the enrollment officer requesting Jack's enrollment as a Chief Machinist Mate, Chief Petty Officer Machinist Mate. Now, on June 27, 1918, The enrollment office, J.M. McGeown, Chief Gunner's Mate, United States Naval Reserve Force, received the official request. It was approved by G.G. Mitchell, Commander USN. So, Jack passed his physical and he was enrolled as a Chief Machinist Mate, Class 4 GS, on June 27, 1918. An interesting fact here. On his draft card, under previous military service, Jack stated he had 3 years of service in the Massachusetts Naval Militia as a seaman, but his 1918 enlistment record does not indicate previous service. Now I'm wondering, why was that left off? Did the Navy look at the Naval Militia as a joke? I mean, I don't know, and I can't find any records online about the Massachusetts Naval Militia. Hey, anybody who might know something about the Naval Militia, hey, please leave a comment below. In the Naval Reserve Force, Class 4 was officers and men enrolled for 4-year periods and available in case of war or national emergency for the coast defense and for special technicist duties on shore. Jack was a civil engineer with 9 years of experience. That's a highly technical skill that the Navy desperately needed. Okay, 2 days later, on June 29, 1918, Jack was in his office at the Kinney Manufacturing Company, specializing in positive pressure rotary pumps, when he sent the following letter to the district enrolling officer, 1st Naval District, U.S. Naval Reserve Force, Boston, Mass. Dear Sir, having been enrolled June 27, 1918 as Chief Machinist Mate, Class 4 of the General Service in the United States Naval Reserve Force, I am ready to go on duty as soon as practicable. 12 days later, Jack received his orders. He was to report at 10:30 a.m. Tuesday, July 16th, to Petty Officer in Charge at Track 22, South Station, Boston, Massachusetts. That wasn't very far from his home. Now, the Navy even ordered the cost of transportation from Dorchester to Boston. However, a handwritten note in the top of his orders said no transportation. I guess somebody decided he could pay for the nickel train ride from his home to South Station. Now, I wonder how my grandmother felt about his enlisting. They'd only been married for 2 years. They were married on November 23, 1915, as a matter of fact. Now, in 1918, there was no internet, no TV, no radio, phones were not a common household item, and home entertainment was extremely limited. So what did they do to occupy their time together? Well, I remember my grandmother Jen, she would tell a story about when they first got married, how they would entertain themselves during the evenings. They would read, they would discuss what happened during the day, talk about local events going on in the city, and at this time most likely talked about the war news. Now on very special occasions, they would go see the Boston Pops at Symphony Hall. Jen said they would wait in line and pay a nickel for the balcony seating. I think she said something about running up the stairs to get in the front row of the balcony for a better view. Anyways, I digress. So, on that last night, did they discuss Jack's situation with the draft? Did Jen agree wholeheartedly with Jack's decision to volunteer? Now, on that last night together on July 15th, 1918, did they go out to dinner? Or did they have a quiet evening at home? They might have had friends come over to say goodbye. Jack's mother lived right next door at 100 Westville Street with her second husband. She might have spent time with her son. Now, these were questions that I will never know the answer to because I never asked them when I had the chance. My grandmother lived until 1979, so I was like 18, 19, I could have asked the questions, you know. Anyways, Jack was in Class 4 enlisting for coastal defense and technical shore duties only. Now this was and still is the U.S. military we're talking about here. If the government decides to assign you to sea duty, there is not a thing you can do about it. So there was a slight concern here. Now, just ask any of the veterans from the War on Terror about the stop-loss program and their enlistment contracts. I'm sure there were some poignant moments between the two. Jack reported in to the Petty Officer in Charge at South Station at 10:30 a.m. on July 16th. Once his group was organized, they boarded a train and headed out for basic training. The train ride lasted all of 20 minutes. Yeah, Jack had been sent to the U.S. Naval Training Center in Hingham, Mass. Now, Jack's time at NTC Hingham was only 23 days, just enough time to learn the basics of naval courtesy, marching, and naval regulations. On August 6, 1918, Jack was transferred to the receiving ship in Boston Harbor. Now, receiving ship in this case is a misnomer. It was actually a very large building on Commonwealth Pier. Actually, it was Commonwealth Pier. So Jack would spend 24 days assigned to the receiving ship awaiting orders. Most likely he was taking classes on how the Navy Public Works Office procured materials, their record-keeping system, as well as learning the duties and responsibilities of a Chief Petty Officer. I mean, talk about a crash course. Now, as this photo shows, the receiving ship held classes in a number of different disciplines. This picture shows a commissary class underway. Okay, now the good news for Jack was that he could go home at night. His orders stated on line 4 that there being no suitable quarters available, they may be procured from your commanding officer. Now this would explain the story Jen would tell me about Jack taking the train home while he was in the Navy. It seems passengers waiting for a train would always ask him when the next train would arrive. They thought he was a train conductor. Okay, if you look at his picture dressed in his naval uniform, I can see why people would make that mistake. He did resemble a train conductor. It was the hat and the bow tie. There's another interesting picture. This was also taken in 1918, but it was sitting on the back porch at 106 Westfield Street in civilian clothes while he was in the Navy. The reason I say this is because Jack only served from July 1918 till January 1919. This picture was taken sometime between August and September. He is outside in his shirt sleeve. By October, it's starting to get pretty cold in Boston. Now, if you look closely, you'll see his haircut is definitely according to Navy regulations. White walls on the side and very short on top. Also, the picture tells me that Jen and Jack lived on the second floor of the apartment, and I did this by analyzing the photograph. You'll see the houses next door had porches below Jack's picture and above Jack's picture. These are called 3-deckers, one family per floor. Now, however, Jen and Jack lived in a 2-decker house, a family on each floor. So, Jack is sitting on the left front corner of the porch, and if you look out at the background, you can make out the rear of the houses on Westfield Terrace. Now, the house at 106 Westfield Street is no longer there. It was torn down at some point, along with the house next door, which was his mother's house. But the houses on Westfield Terrace, they're still standing, which you can see in the background in this picture today. Okay, now if I had to guess, I would say the picture was taken on August 6, 1918. That was the day he reported to the receiving ship where they had no quarters for him, so he went home for the night. It was his first day home after being at Hingham Naval Training Center for 3 weeks. That would explain the very short haircut and the big smile on his face. He was back home with his wife. Now, on August 30th, 1918, Jack was transferred to the Boston Navy Yard in Chelsea, Mass. It was here he would put his experience as a civil engineer to use for the Navy. With the wartime expansion of the U.S. military, naval bases all over the country were upgraded or expanded. The Boston Navy Yard was no different. So what did a Chief Petty Officer machinist mate in the Naval Public Works Department do? Well, with a little research, I was able to find out some things. Now, the department was involved in operating and maintaining all of the Navy's facilities on shore. Public Works departments were involved with planning and execution of massive expansion projects. Now, as a Chief Petty Officer, Jack would have been handling the administrative details of any job he was given, as well as supervising his company of men to make sure the jobs were done according to regulations and properly. So, this would include power distribution, heating, water, wastewater, ground maintenance, communication, transportation, and equipment and facility maintenance throughout the whole Navy Yard. The Yard's Naval Store Warehouse was one of the bigger projects completed by the Navy during this time period. Now, unfortunately, Jack's records do not give any detail of what he actually did at the Navy Yard. These records would be somewhere in NARA in the form of daily reports. Jack spent 6 months and 10 days on active duty with the Navy. Then he was released from his contract. But he only had 6 months on a 4-year contract. What happened? In his file, a letter was sent out from the Bureau of Navigation, circular letter number 225-18. He was relieved from active duty and transferred to the inactive list Naval Reserve Force Class II as of January 25, 1919. Congress had decided to cut the budget, and one place it was cut was the appropriation for paid naval reserve. At the height of enrollment, the U.S. Naval Reserve Force made up 54% of the total number of men and women in the Navy during World War I. Within 2 months of the armistice, on November 11, 1918, the Navy sent out an all-nav 67 stating budget cuts required the Navy to put all the Naval Reserve Force personnel in Class II inactive status. Congress basically cut the Navy's manpower by more than half, while they still had an army to bring back from Europe. That's Congress, go figure. For his service, Jack was awarded the Great War for Civilization Medal, also known as the Great War Victory Medal, without class, which all veterans received. Now, when Jack was released from active duty, he was placed in the inactive reserves, but that was just a formality. Once he walked out of the Boston Navy Yard on January 25, 1919, with his War Service Certificate number 335679 in hand and $191.72 in his pocket, he was done. Now, in $25, that would be $3,200. There was such a large drawdown of men in so short a period of time, the Navy didn't get around to issuing honorable discharges until June of 1922. Jack's discharge was mailed to his address in Winthrop, Massachusetts. By that time, though, he had moved to West Roxbury, Massachusetts, but he forgot to tell the Navy. It took a while, but all of Jack's paperwork would eventually catch up to him. So the war to end all wars was over. Jack's involvement with the military and with the government was done. Well, not so quite. There is an interesting twist to Jack's story. World War II comes around. Jack is now 54 years old. The U.S. government decides to institute a fourth draft registration. On April 27, 1942, the fourth draft registration was held nationwide. Now, this was only for men from the ages of 45 to 64. Jack was right in the middle at 54 years old. The Old Man Draft, as it was called, registered men who were not actually liable for military service, but the government wanted to create an inventory of manpower and skills useful to the war effort. The purpose was to bring underutilized or unemployed men back into a more fruitful occupation and allowing for the release of easily replaceable, younger, or more fit men to fight. Now, luckily for Jack, he was employed as a civil engineer in an industry that was considered essential war work. Otherwise, he might have found himself back in the Navy and back at the Boston Navy Yard, picking up where he left off in 1919. So this is the story of my grandfather's military service during World War I. It wasn't exciting or heroic, but it was his story. It's important to my family. Jack volunteered to serve in a capacity that he was well qualified to do. No heroics, just helping in the war effort. He answered the call when asked, like so many others. Now, with his service record, I was able to recreate a part of his life that was interesting to me. You'll be surprised at just how much information you can comb out of a service record. Now, when you review your relative service record, it's important to pay attention to dates and addresses, as well as any comments written in the margins of the documents or on any photos the records might contain. Now, this is how you can develop a more complete story of what your relative did while they were in the service. Word of caution here. Service records are not in chronological order. They just throw the stuff in the file. So you need to review them carefully to piece together a timeline for your relative. Again, you'll be surprised at just how much you will find out. Now, if you'd like to know more about my maternal grandparents, check out Norwood, Mass. One Family Story, Cheri Beale, Oral History number 7 at this link. Well, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, hit the thumbs up button, ring the bell, and subscribe to my channel. This way, you'll be notified when I post new videos. If you'd leave a comment below, that would be really helpful. The nefarious YouTube algorithm sees the comments. The more comments I get, the higher the algorithm will rank my video, which translates into a wider audience. Thank you for watching.